All right, this is Stonewall Jackson's Way 2, the Battles of Bull Run. This is the first of a wave of games from Multiman Publishing that are basically they're reappraisals, reproductions of the Avalon Hill titles that had the similar style artwork that were produced back in the 1980s and 90s. And so what you have here with Stonewall Jackson's Way 2 is the same content that you had in Stonewall Jackson's Way with a little bit of update as far as play balance goes and a whole new set of scenarios and the campaign for first bull run, not just second bull run. So having played the original Stonewall Jackson's Way, I wanted to play the all green alike first bull run campaign. So I went ahead and set this up and played it over the course of a week. And it's a 13-day scenario, and I've gotten through a little more than half of that. And I've reached a point at which we can go ahead and stop. A decisive outcome has been reached. So what happens in this campaign is you have several posts of Confederate brigades. I think there's one situated at Fairfax, and then several others are positioned around Mansas Junction here, where the main Confederate depot is, and of course it's an important rail network junction. The rest are kind of along Bull Run or in the vicinity of the Bull Run Creek, which is an unfordable creek. You need to look for the fords and the bridges over it to cross it. There's an isolated regiment up here in Lynchburg, and then of course you have Johnston's army, which is up in the valley, kind of off map, and they'll show up in I think the second day. They start kind of coming in, marching hard for the rail depots down by, was that Port Royal? No, Front Royal. I always get those mixed up. And so they got to get on the trains and they got to get to the battlefield because Beauregard's army down here is outnumbered. And so what happens is the Union Army, in fact, both armies in this particular battle, they're going to have some limitations that are unfamiliar to players of the series, in that your command radius has been reduced to a 2-hex radius. And what you're dealing with here are really, instead of corps leaders, these are divisional leaders, and instead of commanding divisions, they command brigades. So the scale's a little bit different from what you're used to playing with, and it's difficult to manage. What you basically have is 2 oversized corps, and it's really hard to coordinate your attacks, your marching. You really got to pay attention to the road network. The Union Army started off with pretty good marches. They had a couple of repulses along the way, they're trying to catch one of the brigades. I forget which one was out at Fairfax, but there's a couple isolated brigades kind of in exposed positions that weren't moving fast enough, and almost swallowed up one of those brigades, but ended up giving Sherman's brigade a bloody nose. Eventually what ends up happening is the Union Army starts marching according to its normal pace. I rolled a bunch of 5s and 6s on the first day. The second day was more like 1, 2s, and 3s. So they slowed down on the second day. The net effect was Beauregard got his army poised along the Bull Run Creek. Meanwhile, McDowell's corps is moving, kind of sidling the creek, trying to reach for a flank, but careful not to move too far from the supply base here, because they're going to have to check supply on, I think it was July 19th. They had to check supply. So I didn't want to get them too far away. I had to be mindful of that. I had the cavalry screening the flank from the Confederate cavalry. Finally get into position and ended up stretching Beauregard's line pretty good. So I felt confident about taking one of the divisions and trying to cross the bridge here at Union Mills. And ended up, it was a bloody repulse. It was a mess. Did not work at all. So substantial setback, I felt. But some success was gained on the far end of the line. There was a crossing near Sudley Springs, and a couple of the Confederate brigades took some hits here. The Union got a couple of really good attacks. Now, they don't have good modifiers, so there has to be a good differential, where you roll much higher than your opponent in order to get the kind of results you're going to need to win this battle. And the Union ended up getting them. The pitched battle ended up being fought mostly on July the 20th. On July 20th, the line got stretched, and Union brigades got to a place where the units coming by rail from the valley, they weren't able to get to the critical sector, which is Mansas Junction. So they had to offload from the train way up here, and they couldn't get down to where they're going to be desperately needed, because what ended up happening was a follow-on attack, after one of the brigades under, who was that? It wasn't Tyler. It was, oh, here he is, Heinzelman. It was Heinzelman's division. One of his brigades got pretty roughly handled in the first setback trying to cross the Union Mills Bridge here, but they did get across on the 20th, pushed the Confederates back, and one Confederate brigade that was guarding these two fords ended up getting trapped right here and absolutely crushed by Sherman's brigade. The result of these setbacks, the retreats here, the retreats here, the retreats up here, ended up pushing up the panic, degrading the morale to the panic level of the Confederates. They were now within, I think, 5 morale points of retreating, and the Union had one more unit they could attack with. They're attacking a 5-strength Confederate unit, and they were able to force them to retreat. That was enough to panic the whole Confederate line. Now, once an army panics, the other side's going to get a lot of points out of that, but it's not enough to win the game yet. In order to really get a decisive win, what needed to happen was they needed to take Mansas Junction, which is a fortified redoubt. And the Confederates had a pretty good-sized force in there. So what the panic does is it means they're going to have a negative modifier to combat, but a lot of that's going to be offset by just the difficulty of getting a retreat result on that particular location. And they've got a good commander in Joe Johnston, so they potentially can still hold their ground. So I didn't retreat them right away. On July 21st, they fell back in an orderly retreat, but the main depot here at Mansas Junction ended up getting attacked successfully, just barely. You could see the effect on Heinzelman's troops. They took losses. They're completely, fatigued out, but they were able to take the redoubt and capture the depot. And so on the following turn, they'll go ahead and destroy that depot. And the result of that is going to be more than enough points to force a decisive victory for the Union. Now, the campaign could conceivably go on until July 28th. These markers on here on the turn track, these are reductions of 90-day men. I just put these down here to remind myself that on this day, we're going to lose 3, 6, 4, 4, and 2 strength points from the on-map armies due to the 90-day men mustering out of the army. So the Union Army is going to lose a considerable amount of strength, but they got some pretty good-sized brigades coming up to supplement what they already have on the field, and they inflicted serious losses on, they inflicted twice as many losses on the Confederacy than they took themselves. So this is what I would call the best possible outcome that McClellan could have, or McDowell could have possibly hoped for in First Bull Run. The Confederacy at this point, their next depot, supply depot, is way back at Fredericksburg, and so they're going to have to retreat. Well, they're going to have to retreat all the way back to Fredericksburg in order to reestablish their supply line. So on the 24th of July, they're going to have to check for supply, and you got to be within 15 hexes using roads and rail to the depot, and that's going to put them kind of in this area here, kind of in this belt. They can still forage north of there, but that's probably not a good idea, especially when they're already dealing with the panic situation, which lasts the duration of the campaign. This turn, they're also dealing with heat. You got a bunch of demoralized troops. You've got weakened brigades and regiments. You're holding a line that's way too long. Joe Johnston's army is not in great shape, having had to travel a vast distance very rapidly. And so they've established a good line along Broad Run, and the Union Army is exhausted right now. But they're covering the crossings of Broad Run well. So the Confederates can forget any counterattack, and the Union really doesn't have anything to gain by pressing these kinds of attacks. I think if things were to continue, they would try to just simply outmarch the Union or the Confederate line by bringing forces around this wooded area south of Cedar Run. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and call it at this point. It was definitely fun, but it was ridiculous how the combats worked out, with only like 2 or 3 exceptions, worked out very, very well in the Union's favor, which is, you know, not something you can always expect. And so it was kind of cool to see what might have been at first Bull Run. You know, could this have, you know, significantly shortened the war? Who knows? But that's the way we, you know, one of the reasons why we play these games. And that's sometimes the way the dice just work out for you. So I did make some poor decisions, I think, with the Union on day 1, but they got offset by some lucky breaks later on. And I know I made some bad moves with the Confederacy that did not get offset when they got into combat situations. So in terms of decision making and maneuver, I feel like I made about an equal number of bad decisions for either side. But the funny thing is the combat just tended to favor the Union, even though they didn't always have the modifiers. Most of those combats, they only had maybe a net +1, +2 tops modifier, which is okay, but somewhat risky. When you have a short campaign, you don't have a lot of time, and you're going to lose a whole bunch of troop strength from these 90-day boys mustering out. So that's what I've been having on the table here. This is a great system. I love the great campaigns of the American Civil War series. You know, the playbook looks really thick, but that's just because it's packed full of content. The actual series rules, and this is from the Hood Strikes North game, this rule set here is weighing in at like 22 pages, 23 pages. Now, it's a little smaller print, typeface. If there's one thing I could request, it'd be that they increase the typeface a little bit bigger, maybe like GMT's rule books. So the typeface is a little small in this, but it's, you know, this is not a long rule book. This is not a difficult system to learn at all. It's a really, really cool system. It gives you a neat sense of the flow of a campaign. It's tactical enough that you can see the battles develop, but it's definitely an operational level game on the American Civil War, and certainly a good companion game to the Shelby Foote series books that I'm reading right now. So I'm Joel Tappan. This is Stonewall Jackson's Way 2. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll have some more content coming to you soon. I know I haven't done any videos for a little while because I've been busy working on some vassal projects, but I was hoping to maybe do take a look at Red Flag over Paris. So we'll maybe take a look at that in our next video. So stay tuned to the channel for more.